You're listening to Parasearch Radio, news, views and reviews from the world of the paranormal from across the UK and beyond. Find us on Facebook, Twitter and the World Wide Web. Parasearch UK Radio. Parasearch Radio, broadcasting to the UK and beyond.
The views and opinions expressed by presenters and guests are their own and do not necessarily reflect the official policy or position of Parasearch Radio or its affiliates and sponsors. Listener discretion is advised. You're listening to Kerry Greenaway and Mark Manley on the Dark Mirror Paranormal Show, only on Parasearch Radio.
Good evening and welcome to the Dark Mirror Paranormal Show. My name is Kerry Greenaway, as you all should know by now, and I'm joined in the studio by the lovely Mark Manley. Good evening, Mark.
Good evening, viewers.
And the beautiful Caz Rooney. Good evening, Caz.
Good evening.
And we're also joined by a very special person who is so knowledgeable that the rest of us are going to be quiet for the next hour and listen to Mr. Andy Mercer telling us all about Norse mythology. Good evening, Andy. How are you?
Good evening. I'm fine, thank you.
Oh, those dulcet tones. I've missed those dulcet tones on the airwaves. You've been around for a while. Well, where have you been hiding?
Well, I've been all over the place. I don't know if you guys know I was in America for a while. Went to New York for Christmas and froze half to death at minus 17 degrees. Absolutely chilly beyond belief. What else have you been doing?
Right, is all I'm saying on that one.
Well, it wasn't my choice. It wasn't my choice. I was dragged against my will. That was a pretty amazing place, actually. I enjoyed it. I met up with an old friend of known for many years. We actually finally met face to face for the first time. That was really good. And, other than that, I've actually been finishing off my book, the new one, which is out in the next couple of weeks. Yay, finally. Going through all the proofreading and all the cover work's been done, so it should be out very, very soon. So,
what would the name of your book be?
The Wicked Shall Decay. My compendium.
So it's one about Kerry.
Oh, yes.
No, I had a little sneak peek at this at the Nameless Art convention. That was last year. It's a book I'm definitely going to be getting because it sounds absolutely fascinating. Now, you are doing another Nameless Art convention this year, aren't you?
Yes, and in fact, I've just come from the meeting where we were discussing the plans for this year's convention, which the subject matter this time is the origins of magic. It's the arcane traditions from around the world, how different forms have begun. We've got 3 confirmed speakers at the moment, and we're waiting on a couple of others, but it's all looking good. We're going to be talking about subjects such as voodoo. We've got someone talking about the origins of British witchcraft. Another guy talking about ancient Egyptian magic, and another guy talking about his own tradition of witchcraft, and hopefully, maybe, possibly, or maybe not, me talking about John Dee Knockin magic. But that's very much dependent upon any other guest. I'm kind of the stand-in person because I'm a co-organiser, and organising and speaking on the day is quite a lot of work. So I've opted this time to be part of the organising, but not necessarily speaking. But as I say, if I can't find a 5th person, I'll be speaking as well.
Which is absolutely astonishing. So we'll keep you updated on this particular convention because I went to this convention last year and it was absolutely fascinating and so interesting as well. I learnt so much, and I'm definitely, if at all possible, going to be going again this year because I really enjoyed it last year.
Well, it's the end of September this year, so we'll keep updated as what's going on.
Just need to make sure it doesn't.
You don't want me coming along saying aliens or anything like that?
No aliens allowed. Although Andy Collins is speaking, but he's not an aliens person. That's the other one I forgot to mention. Andy Collins is also speaking about a place called Göbekli Tepe, which is a very, very strange site in Turkey that's probably one of the oldest structures in the world.
I know the one you're talking about. Yeah. Is that the one with the stones that are so close together you couldn't even get a Rizzler down there?
No, somewhere else. But yes, it's a very interesting site. It's estimated to be around about 13,000 years old, and there are evidence of magic rituals that may well have been performed at the site. And he's going to be talking about that. So we're talking about the origins of the very earliest of magic as well with Andrew. So yeah, that's the current lineup as it stands. A couple of gaps we need to fill, but yes, it's definitely going ahead, and we are looking forward to it.
Fantastic. Now, you've written another book recently, haven't you? All about runes.
Yes, that was my second book out, which came out about 3 years ago now, which is about a specific set of runes, which is a bit of a story in itself, which I'm not necessarily going to right now, but obviously part of that is examining elements of Norse mythology, which is why I said I'd come on and have a listen to what you guys have to say. So I will leave it to you. Tell me all about Norse mythology.
Well, before we get into Norse mythology, I just want to give a shout out. On the 4th of February, I will actually be doing a show with Andy Mercer regarding this particular set of runes and all about runes. So mark it in your diary, guys, because that show is going to be absolutely fascinating. It's not a subject I know a huge amount about, even though I've got my own set of runes. I don't really use runes, but that is a show that's up and coming.
Very nice runes, I know.
I've got lots of nice things.
Indeed.
Anyway.
Sorry for that comment.
I don't know. Anyway, tonight we are talking Norse mythology, leading on from our troll show last week. If you missed that, it's available as a podcast. You can listen back through the Spreaker account, or you can go onto YouTube. All the shows from Parasearch go to podcasts on both forums, which you can listen to. And thank you, Alan. He says you're a pervert, Mark. Just saying. Hashtag just saying.
No, he is technically correct. But to be absolutely fair, Alan, it was Kerry that corrupted me. So,
I corrupt lots of people along the way. Don't you worry about that. Alan being one of them I'm working on at the moment. Bless his little cotton socks. So, anyway, back to the topic in hand. We're going on from what we talked about with Trolls last week. We're talking about Norse mythology. Now, this is a huge topic. We're not going to be able to cover it all, guys. As you know, it's a Friday show. So, Mark, over to you.
What do you want to talk about? Do you want to talk about the sagas, or do you want to talk about the gods, or do you want to talk about monsters?
Let's go with the beginnings.
Gods and goddesses usually belong to one of two tribes. And my pronunciation is probably as good as yours on these things. The Aesir and the Vanir, is that right?
It's not bad. It's pretty good.
So we have an expert who knows how to say these words tonight.
How do you say it? Is it Aesir?
Well, actually, you're quite okay, because it's not necessarily absolutely 100% it's said this particular way, because it can vary depending on what part of Scandinavia you're coming from. But AC and Vanir, yeah, it's pretty good. Yeah, we'll go for that.
Fair enough. Throughout most of the old tales, the deities from the two tribes, basically, they get along fairly easily. And it's really quite difficult to pin down firm distinctions between the two groups. Remember, Frankie Goes to Hollywood did two tribes. Anyway. But there was a time when that wasn't the case, and that was the War of the Gods. Do you know about that, Andy? I imagine you do. Would you like to say something about the War of the Gods?
No, you're doing fine. You carry on.
Uh-oh.
Okay, thank you. These names are going to kill me.
Ooh, Caz. Should we go down the pub, Caz, while these two men... Sorry, carry on. War of the Gods.
Freya.
Carry on.
We've all heard of Freya, yeah? I mean, Freya, Scandinavian name anyway, she appears in every single Final Fantasy game, and she was the main goddess of the Vanir, yeah? Mm-hmm. She was the foremost practitioner of that form of magic, principally concerned with discerning and altering the course of destiny. Like historicals, I can't even say this word, Seidr, S-E-I-D-R practitioners. Is that right, Seidr?
It sounds fun. Go on.
All right, okay. I'm just wondering if I have to sound like the Swedish chef when I say it.
Don't try to put the accent on. You'll sound silly. So just carry on. You're doing fine.
She wandered from town to town, playing her craft for hire. Under the name Hjör, which means bright, she eventually came to the hometown of the Aesir. The Aesir were quite taken by her powers and zealously sought her services, But soon they realised that their values of honour, kin, loyalty and obedience to the law were being pushed aside by their selfish desires, which they thought to fulfil with the witch's magic. Blaming Freya for their own shortcomings, the Aesir called her Gulrig, which means gold greed, and attempted to murder her. 3 times they tried to burn her, and 3 times she was reborn from the ashes. Cool, they're nice people, aren't they? Because of this, the Aesir and the Vanir came to hate and fear each other, and these hostilities basically erupted into a massive war. And the Aesir fought by the rules of plain combat with weapons of brute force, while the Vanir used the subtler means of magic. The war went on for some time, both sides gaining the upper hand by turns, and eventually the 2 tribes of divinities became weary of fighting and decided to call a truce. And as was customary between the ancient Nords and Germanic peoples, the two tribes go to war, agreed to pay tribute to each other by sending hostages to live among the other tribe. Freyr and Njord of the Vanir went to the Aesir, and I can't pronounce that.
Honir, surely. Ho. It's got to have ho in there.
That sounds like pretty much most towns around here. Honir and Midnir went to live with the Vanir. Njord and his children seem to have lived more or less in peace in Asgard. Unfortunately, the same can't be said of Honir and Minir. Minir. The Vanir, unfortunately, immediately saw that Honir was seemingly able to deliver incomparably wise advice on any problem. But they failed to notice that this was only when he had Mimir in his company. Honir was actually a rather slow-witted simpleton. That's nice. It was at a loss for words when Mimir wasn't available to counsel him. So a bit like this show of Andy, wasn't it? After Honir responded to Vanir's entreaties with the unhelpful let others decide one too many times, the Vanir thought they'd been cheated in the hostage exchange. They beheaded Mimir and sent the severed head back to Asgard. Oh dear, where the distraught Odin chanted magic poems over the head and embalmed it in herbs. Thus preserved, Mimir's head continued to give indispensable advice to Odin in times of need. And the two tribes were still weary of fighting a war that was so evenly matched. However, rather than renewing their hostilities over this tragic misunderstanding, each of the Aesir and Vanir came together and went into a cauldron, and from their saliva they created Kvasir, the wisest of all beings, as a way of pledging sustained harmony. Whew, there you go.
Well, that's one of them. Isn't Freya?
That is one of them.
Freya is still really quite prevalent, though, in today's society, isn't it? You hear multiple people that worship or do rituals or stuff talking about Freya and still doing rituals in her name.
Well, yeah, I mean, well, as Andy knows, and as I said earlier, she comes in, because I play a lot of games. She's always one of the main prevalent characters in every single Final Fantasy game we've ever played. She is still worshipped. She's the goddess of this, that, and the other, and very, very popular.
Andy, what's your take on Freya?
Well, it's one of those Nordic deities that has become, as you're saying, quite popular. She seems to have leaked into the kind of pagan tradition as well. The pagan tradition is borrowed from so many different sources. All sorts of names kind of wander into it, but she's one of the most prevalent and common that you do come across. I think it's because it's a good, strong feminine archetype. I think that's one of the things that she appeals to people with, because of that sort of sense of strength and order and importance as well, and being a woman. So that's part of the reason I think she's become popular. Also because she's one of the ones that features in Wagner's Ring Cycle, which again repopularised the Norse mythology in the 1800s. It kind of sort of disappeared a little bit into the background, but the Wagner's Ring Cycle made a huge change to people's interest and really brought forward people's interest in elements of the Norse mythology, although there's a lot more to it than what you get in the Ring Cycle. So I think that's part of the reason that, say, she's a good, strong feminine archetype, feminine image. So I think that's why she's popular and important.
Yeah, I mean, Alan in the chat room has said, wasn't Freya the shield maiden?
Yes.
Yes, she was.
So it buys into that image of what, we talked about empowerment of women last night, and that is a very strong image for women to take on. It's that power and that physical representation of being aware of your sexuality as well as embracing your inner power.
Mm-hmm.
Kerry, please, no, don't go out and get the Brunhilde outfit. I've told you about that before. You're not a Valkyrie. Just knock it off with the studded bra, okay?
You know, it's too late. I've already got that outfit and the sword and the shield. You know, come on, guys.
Oh, God, all right then, if you must. We'll be up in a few weeks.
Sure.
Rocking it out. If I'm not Wonder Woman, I'm wearing my spider outfit.
And just one quick one. If on the flip side, if you want to know about one of their monsters, what about Huldra? Or she's also called Talamaja in Swedish. She is a troll-like woman living in the woods. She's fair and beautiful, but wild, and has a long cowl tail which she hides behind her back upon meeting a human. It is said that Adam and Eve had many children. Well, they had no TV, so I guess so. And that one day when Eve was giving her children a bath, God came to visit, as he does. Eve had not finished bathing all her children, and so she hid those who were dirty in the grasses. And God said, haven't you got any more children? What you had? And Eve said, no. And God said, then let all that is hidden remain hidden, and the hidden children became the underjordiska, the ones living underground. Lost souls who live under the surface of the earth, calling for someone to be with them, usually human passers-by. Huldra is one of them, but she somehow remained above the ground, and she is a flirtatious young girl who is neither good nor evil.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, going back to Freya. That sounds like something we talked about on the Troll Show.
Oh, no. I'm doing the opposite. We're doing gods, and that was the bad one.
Okay. Anyway, going back to Freya and Wagner.
Wagner.
Sorry, Wagner.
Wagner.
Didn't Wagner write another saga that we talked about in the ship show?
In the what show?
The ship. Ghost ships.
I know he's half a night about watershed, but blimey. It's not that bad.
Shipper. No, the Shipper show.
One of his first operas that was particularly successful was The Flying Dutchman, which is on
that's what it was.
Ghost Ship. Yes. He's best known for the Ring Cycle, of course, but yeah, the Flying Dutchman is Wagner's style. Was early on quite like other composers of his time, but he began to very much develop his own style of music, a style of writing, and he put things were leitmotifs, which is little tunes that you hear to associate with particular people or characters. Very common in TV and films these days. Everyone's got their own theme, but Wagner was the first to really introduce that idea of the leitmotif, and The Flying Dutchman was one of the first of his operas to have that as a feature. So you hear a little bit of music, a particular character is about to turn up on screen, or they're speaking, you hear the tune in the background. That became unique to Wagner at first, but now it's copied by everybody. But yeah, The Flying Dutchman is one of Wagner's earlier pieces.
I thought he'd come up before whilst we were talking about various subjects. Now, Richard in the chat room has said, is Freya, I'm assuming he means Freya, the fat lady that sings at the end of Wagner's operas?
That's Brunhilde, isn't it?
That's Brunhilde, exactly. Brunhilde is the wife of Siegfried. Excuse me, after the spell has been broken, Siegfried has killed himself, or has been killed, I should say. They have the funeral pyre, and she sings between 20 and 24 minutes, depending on the speed the opera's going at, because the conductor dictates the speed, and the idea of not only the fat lady sings comes from that. It's the idea that she's got this 20 plus minutes singing to do with the big horns on a helmet, which is an absolute anathema, because the Viking helmets never ever had horns on them. Unfortunately, Wagner recreated that nonsense about horns on there. But anyway, she sings with the hat with the horns on for 20 odd minutes over the funeral pyre of Siegfried, and that's where that phrase comes from. Not over the fat lady.
And we also learned that Vikings never had horns on their hats through that, which is actually quite depressing.
Why?
Oh, come off it, Kerry. You know there's a joke in there about Vikings being horny somewhere.
Caz, you work in a very witchcraft way. Have you come across Freya at all in your workings, in what you do?
Bits and pieces, but got to remember I'm still studying, so I'm actually enjoying this, Andy. This is like an education for me.
No, it always is an education when Andy's on, I tell you. So,
Dear.
no, it's a good thing. It's a good thing. You have to remember this. Now, there was one account. Now, I want to talk a little bit about the Norse creation of cosmology.
Yggdrasil.
Yes.
You didn't just swear, then, don't worry.
You see the blank look on my face there, wasn't it?
Sorry.
The origin of the cosmos, because that's very involved, isn't it, in regards to Norse mythology?
Well, of course, most mythologies have as part of their stories, if you like, the origins of everything, the birth of the planet or the birth of the universe, the galaxy, etc. They all have that element in their stories. So it's all part of the kind of framework of mythology. So, yes.
Who wants to talk about that then? Who wants to lay out what we know about that or what we found out about that?
Well, I'm going to talk about Thor's hammer, so I'll let Andy do this one.
No, you carry on.
Kaz?
I can't even find the bit with it on there, so somebody else can carry on.
I think Kerry should do it.
Okay, I'll do it then, being as nobody else does. Right, before there was soil or sky or any green thing, there was only the gaping abyss of Gap.
Yawning gap, yeah. The void.
The void. And the chaos of perfect silence and darkness lay between the homeland of elemental fire, which was Muspelheim.
Keep going, you'll be all right.
And the homeland of elemental ice, which is Niflheim.
Niflheim, yeah.
Frost from Niflheim and billowing flames from it's Musseltaff. That's all I want to say for that word.
Musseltaff, that's Judaism.
I know, I'm going to get so confused. Muspelhelm crept towards each other until they met in Gap. And amid hissing and sputtering, the fire melted the ice and drops formed themselves into Ymir, or Mir, I would think, who was the first of the godlike giants. Now, Ymir was a hermaphrodite and could reproduce asexually, so when he sweated, more giants were born. Now, I know, it sounds a bit gross, doesn't it? As the frost continued to melt, a cow, just a strange cow just appeared, who was called Ord Humbler. She emerged from it. She nourished Mia with her milk, and she in turn was nourished by salt licks in the ice. Her licks slowly uncovered Buri, the first of the Aesir tribe of gods. Buri had a son named Bor, who married... Oh, this is like the Bible with... He begets who, begets so-and-so, begets so-and-so.
Mythology is always like that.
It is, isn't it? Bor, who married Bestla, the daughter of the giant Boltthorn. The half-god, half-giant children of Bor and Bestla were Odin. Love a bit of Odin. Grrr. Who became the chief of the Aesir gods, and his two brothers, Vili and Vi. That's imaginative names. Odin and his brothers slew Mir and set about constructing the world from his corpse. Now,
this is the bit I know about.
This is the bit you know, yeah?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Now, Odin and his brothers slew Mir and set about constructing the world from his corpse. They fashioned the oceans from his blood, the soil from his skin and muscles, vegetation from his hair, clouds from his brains, and the sky from his skull. And then we get dwarves into the mix. 4 dwarves, corresponding to the 4 cardinal points, held Mir's skull aloft above the earth. And then the gods eventually formed the first man and woman, Ask and Embla, from 2 tree trunks and built a fence around their dwelling place called Midgard to protect them from the giants. Now, this is so resonating with so many different other mythologies and religions.
Exactly. Do you remember me saying a long time ago, remember when we were talking about religions and stuff, every single religious book has the same things all along the same timeline. They just put it in a different way. And also, this sounds like this should be turned into an Iron Maiden track. But anyway, carry on.
So, Andy, this is your bag, isn't it? This area is your bag, because this also links into, when we do rituals, 4 cardinal points, and then we have things that relate to those cardinal points, and it all starts to build a picture of where we all it distills down, doesn't it, to these stories?
Well, it is part of the common mythology of construction of the universe, that it tends to be to do with battles and the defeat and the guys that win build the universe, reality, world, etc., out of the bodies or remains of those who have lost. It's a common theme, or they are put to task to create the world. So it goes back to other mythologies. And I mean, don't want to go too deep into this because it's our Friday show, it's more fun. But this is one of those thematic ideas you find in different cultures around the world that kind of you wonder how it is they've got similar concepts. So as Mark rightly said, you hear this story again and again in different cultures and societies that aren't connected or have had no links, but yet have built similar mythologies about the construction of the world, which comes into that whole notion of the collective unconscious, the deeper levels of our understanding of reality, that we can create ideas that are similar without any connection to each other, because it adheres to how our brains actually work. So it is another example of that kind of defeated put to use to make the universe, or their bodies are used to create it. I know it particularly because, of course, Odin, without talking too much about the show we're going to do about runes in a couple of weeks, Odin, of course, is the father of the runes, and so that's why it's an area I know a lot about, because that's where the runes have come from Odin's Trial of the Nine Nights, which we'll talk about another time. So that's an area I know a lot about. But you're doing fine, guy. You really are summarising the Norse mythology pretty well, and you are doing well with some very difficult words.
I was just about to say, I think for Kerry, who sat back and wasn't going to do it, you're doing well.
Yeah.
So we just need the wee Scottish one to do one of the stories, and we've made.
But I say, when I read this about the beginning of the cosmology, which is where, in regards to Norse mythology, I'm just sitting there thinking, oh my goodness, I've read this story in different forms so many different times through so many different mythologies, and that coming together of the fire and ice coming together and all those kind of things, and then going right back to the end of that, where they eventually form the first man and woman, Ask and Embla, from the two tree trunks. No different from Adam and Eve.
Yep, absolutely. The parallels exist. Some entomologists will try and claim that it's because the mythology of the Norse has come from other mythologies that are older. But that's a highly debatable point, and there were certainly others who would disagree entirely. But there is a similarity, certainly. The way of construction of life and reality, it parallels because it kind of fits with how it probably happened, not literally, but certainly the idea of how consciousness develops, this awareness of self, and the idea of once you're aware of self and the world around you, you want to try and find an explanation for why everything's there, and then you start to create stories and myths. But the similarities, as I was saying, that it is remarkable, considering there are often cultures who've had no links before, even down to like the tree, as you say, with Adam and Eve, and then these two bodies being formed from the tree of knowledge. That again is something that seems a very common theme. One of the things you could mention is Yggdrasil, which you were talking about before without naming. I think you did call it something, but Yggdrasil anyway.
We called it something.
I mean, there are definite...
I'm sorry, little Miss Posh Totty there.
Well, there's certainly parallels in terms of the schematics of it to the Kabbalah from Judaism. Now, again, these are two religions or mythologies who would have had no contact connection whatsoever, but this whole concept of this kind of symbol of connection, of real different realms connecting together and then being balanced at the centre in the case of Yggdrasil, or at the base, and then rising to the top in the Kabbalah. So there's similarities there again. I mean, some scholars go bananas. You can just begin to compare the Kabbalah with Yggdrasil, and certainly people who are more into Norse mythology get annoyed with the idea. But there's no escaping that there are definite parallels going on there that people are aware of. So it is interesting the way these things interconnect, and ideas seem to emerge in different cultures without any connection whatsoever.
I find that fascinating.
Also found the aliens link.
Oh, God.
Yeah, there you go. The religions. You have got the Indian books that talk about the Vimaras and stuff like that, and you've got the gods riding the sky in their chariots. So did the Norse gods.
Oh,
I'm actually face palming.
I mean,
I'm actually face palming right now.
I told you I'd do it.
The trouble is, there is some validity to it. This the fact that there is so many sky references in terms of origins of beings, origins of gods, and things flying through the air and the sky. That you can understand. I mean, I don't believe in nuts and bolts aliens coming to us now at all. I really can see there's a possibility that perhaps in the ancient past there may have been some kind of visitations. But again, we just don't know. But there is that similarity. And you mentioned the most common one is the Vamana from Hindu mythology. I mean, they sound for all the world like spaceships. And when you read the descriptions of them, you have things like the wheel of Ezekiel in the Bible. But if you know the Kabbalah, then you'll recognize there's Kabbalistic symbolism in that story. Now, of course, the biblical story itself is much older than the Kabbalah, because the Kabbalah itself, as we know it now, is fairly modern, but it has lineages and roots that go way back. So sometimes we can reinterpret this sky imagery based on what we understand today in terms of UFOs, space aliens, etc., etc. That doesn't necessarily mean that even those stories are talking about real physical beings coming down from the sky. It's like the beings are here. Where do they come from? From the ground? We do have stories of underground dwellers like the trolls, as you've spoken of before. So where do they come from? They come from the sky. So they might drop down of the sky. But also you have things like simple things that we know today straight away, like meteor showers and comets, things we'd recognise straight away now. To the ancients were like, what the hell's that? We had no idea. The idea of the eclipses, they would absolutely scare the living daylights out of them. Suddenly the sun's gone dark. What's happening? Let's sacrifice somebody because the sun's gone dark. So we can often reinterpret that imagery and ideas based on what we understand today that might be taking it a long way from where it was actually meant. But then again, there was also the possibility that's exactly what they meant, that these really have come from outer space. So yes, you could get aliens in there, Mark, if you push hard enough.
Oh yeah, and the Vimaras with Vimara, I don't even know how you say it. That sounds like a dog Vimara. Vimana, thank you. They're supposed to run off red mercury, weren't they?
Yes, but what's red mercury? What is it?
I have no idea.
I was just, yeah, we both went blank then.
Yeah, because I don't know what it is. What is it referring to? I mean,
and you've got the example. I was going to say, you've also got that temple that's been in South America, and they found underneath that it's got that big pool of liquid mercury, and I think it was the same place where they had the inscription of that prince or king or whatever he is, supposedly in a rocket controlling it.
Yes, I mean, again, that's down to modern interpretation, isn't it, though? The image itself of what we think it is based on our sort of thinking today of things like the Mercury rockets themselves that went up, obviously, from NASA. Again, it's open to interpretation. I tend to think, again, it's more mythological, it's symbolism rather than being an actual spacecraft. But I don't know, I'm not the expert on this, but I'm interested in imagination.
Or precursors, I don't know. Or precursors.
Anyway.
We need to get back to the mythology because Dame Brunhilde there really wants to talk about Thor and his flowing hair.
And the big hammers.
And the big hammers.
Oh no, I'm so sorry, but I really do.
Go, that's what it's supposed to be about.
Does that make me a sad cow? I don't care.
That's what the show's supposed to be about.
So where
did the cow come from in the book? I want to know where that cow just magically came from. I mean, are we talking Magic Roundabout?
Not quite, no.
Just talk. Kerry,
cow?
close your mouth up. There you go. The cow. You said the cow appeared.
No, as the frost continued to melt, a cow came out. I mean, it came out of the frost.
If you think about it, it makes perfect sense because a cow is so useful. It provides insulation. It provides warning in the form of dung. The dung actually is a brilliant insulator. You make your basic building and smear dung on it. Okay, it might be smelly at first, but once it's dry, the smell goes and it's rock hard. It's like concrete. It can set really solidly. A cow produces milk. It sustains you. It keeps you alive. And ultimately, of course, you can kill it and you get a lot of meat out of a cow. So it's always been in various cultures a very, very important animal. I mean, we sometimes talk about in Hinduism about cows being sacred. They're not sacred. They're just incredibly useful, so they're very important. And that's also true of a lot of other societies. One of the first animals that was domesticated when we went from being hunter-gatherers to building communities, when things like mythologies and stories first began, because we had the time to sit down and write them and create them. Cows were one of the first things we herded, we kept together. So there's the first farming animal. So they're always going to be important. So the fact that you see a cow emerge from the ice sounds bizarre to modern eyes and ears, but actually it makes a lot of sense because it's a very useful animal.
And they make good jackets.
Love a bit of cow.
No.
Just saying. Take me out for a steak dinner, anybody? I'm up for that.
The cow,
Not the cow.
No,
bit.
because you
No,
want
I
to
don't
dress
want
up
that
as
bit.
Brunhilde.
Yeah. Now, the other thing was the 4 cardinal points that I picked out of when I was reading that. That was another thing that actually flagged up for me. The 4 cardinal points, they are still very, very relevant and useful. And we work to those when we work rituals, don't we?
Yes.
And
Oh, look at me.
one thing that actually came out the other night was, now I don't know if I picked this up from a book somewhere along the line or whether I'm making this up as I go along, but wasn't there supposed to be a way of divination in regard to elements like iron and lead and sulfur and those sort of things, and the cardinal points on a map that you would then cast stones over? I'm making it up, clearly.
No, I missed what you said. I'm sorry.
Oh, well, not paying attention.
I'm reading
sure
about.
there's a divination method where there's a board that's made up, and you make the board into various areas of elements like iron, sulfur, earth elements, and then you cast stones, and I'm assuming when they say stones, it's crystals, across the board, and where the crystals land, you then read it as you would like a divination method. But I say I've got this memory, but I can't remember where I got that from. It could be from it could be a made up thing.
Well, things have been used for divination, all sorts of things for centuries, all sorts of different ways of which people try and foretell the future or what's happening to them. So you may well have seen it somewhere. It sounds like the sort of thing that someone probably has made at some point, or you just made it all up and then you've invented your own divination. There you go.
I was going to say, maybe I've just invented my own. Maybe I should be doing that. And that was relevant to the 4 cardinal points. And in witchcraft and Wicca and paganism, the 4 cardinal points are incredibly important as well, aren't they? We always go to the east.
Yes.
This I'm totally out of my league here, so I'm just going to sit here and nod and look at you.
Yes.
Okay, now the other thing, something that Andy sent to me, was the essence of the Thusatra tradition, which sounds very witchcrafty to me.
The Thursatru or Terzatru, yes. It's an alternate third path. Now, we talked before about the Aesir and the Vanir, and you mentioned briefly talking about the giants. Now, one thing that is a little interesting, if you read the mythologies, the giants disappear. They kind of wander off. They don't seem to get mentioned anymore. And there is a new trend, if you like, a modern kind of Norse mythology, Norse magic, that is based around the giants themselves, that they are harbingers of destruction. They want to end reality and bring it out of existence. And that the Thursatru or Terzatru movement or magic is based on that idea of the destructive power of the giants, kind of either trying to harness their power or also bring about the destruction of all reality, the anti-cosmic approach. So, yes, it's an unusual idea. I've got the main author who's written about it, has written a trilogy of books which are fascinating, I have to say. I'm not entirely sold on the idea, but he seems to have found a kind of a gap, if you like. There is a gap in our knowledge of the Norse mythology, and a particular member of the mythology, like the giants, the frost giants, do kind of disappear out of it. So, yeah.
Because they melted.
Well, they're frost giants, not made of ice. They are big, lumbering monsters, but they're cosmic energies is the idea. It's the cosmic destruction as well. One of the ideas that kind of exists in this alternate approach is this underlying notion that reality itself needs to end, that we should be working towards its destruction, and that it should be returned to the source, and there should be nothing, which is an interesting approach to things. It's kind of what they call anti-cosmic. It's anti-God. It's the idea of niceness.
It's anti-order. It's anti-order.
Not so much that, it's a different order. It's the unity of everything into nothingness, because there's no definition, there's no division, there's no possibility of anything other than just the nullness, if you like. So it's like bringing things back to what's sometimes called the Ein Sof. It's the origin, the source, return it all to the source. It's fascinating stuff.
It's like being at school listening to a geography lesson with somebody, the really boring teacher then. Yes,
you want to fall into the void, that's for definite.
Yeah.
Escape it all, yes.
Yeah. Richard Clements just said in the chat room, giants have started to come back in the pseudo-archaeological field as well. Yes, you're right, because there's more and more evidence pointing to there having been a race of giants about with the double row teeth, isn't there?
Well, let's I'll throw a spanner into the works, because there is another station I'm involved in that we interviewed a very, very interesting chap talking about giants, but he's talking about real validated scientific evidence that there were Native Americans who grew around 8 to 9 feet tall, and they absolutely definitely existed. But funny enough, the exact question about the double row of teeth came up when they said there's no evidence that's ever been the case, but certainly the skulls show the signs of at least 4 extra teeth that would obviously be at the back, because they're physically much larger, so there's more space for teeth to grow in. And they said that a lot of the evidence has been suppressed. It's a conspiracy, not dark, sinister UFO, black ops conspiracy, more to do with the fact of eugenics, which is that very unpleasant idea that certain races are better than others, that streamlining of races and get rid of oddities should be removed. That was made very popular by a certain small chap with a silly moustache in the 1930s in Germany.
I don't know what you mean.
But it was, unfortunately, it was actually seen as a legitimate scientific field in the 20s and 30s, particularly in America, I have to say. And the idea that there were these physically superior 8-9 feet tall Native Americans was very much suppressed and hidden, because it didn't fit with that eugenics idea of white Westerners as being the supreme race. So the evidence has been pushed to one side and largely hidden, but it's definitely there, even though this guy's done a lot of serious scientific research and has uncovered a lot of this material that clearly shows that up to 8 to 9 feet tall American natives definitely existed. Now, obviously, we're not talking about 30-foot tall, 5 type giants, not those sort of nonsense, but physically much larger human beings were certainly walking around America as early or as recent as between sort of 5,000 to 8,000 years ago. So, and that's another network, but it's worth having a listen to. The guy's really interesting, and maybe get one here.
Maybe we will. Now, there is, in regards to the strata ones, I've lost my place. Thyrses, the Thersastras, I can't even say it now.
Yeah, I call it Thorsian, but there's no Thur, it's Tur, so it's Torsian. Torsian mythology.
Yeah. Now, there's some meditation. Now, this is the bit I liked, right, about this. Now, because we go into a bit more, not stuff I know about, but things we would have all heard about. Now, there's some meditations that you can call and learn from the Thyrses themselves, isn't there? And you can invoke Loki and Sutra. Who's he? She?
No idea.
Loki, though. We all know Loki, don't we? Because he's linked to Thor.
With the exception of Thor, for some reason that's become very much caught up in our speech. It's not, TH is not Thur, it's T. But for some reason, Thor has become Thor, even though it should be Tor properly. But yeah, so try and say T rather than Thur, and then you'll get much closer.
Oh. Fine. Okay, just got told off.
You really wish you'd asked me to come on there, don't you?
Tor? Yeah. Okay, Mr. Tor. I thought Thor and Loki were brothers.
Yes. Well, Thor and Loki, yeah.
They're half brothers, aren't they?
Loki, sorry, not Loki. Loki. God, I'm getting it all wrong now. And weren't they born from Odin?
Pedantic git. Yes. Odin's their father, different mothers.
What a naughty daddy is all I can say on that one.
Oh, he put it about a bit.
Oh, absolutely.
Now, these are like demigods.
No, they're gods.
So Thor, and Loki are not demigods, they're gods.
Yeah, Thor's a god of lightning and Loki's a god of mischief.
Remember, their conception of God is somewhat different in this mythology, because we're more used to the Judeo-Christian notion of the single existing God. But of course,
they have a sister.
in these pantheons, they're still gods in themselves, but gods are specific things, specific powers, specific abilities, whereas Judeo-Christian God is just the one God. So, because you're talking about pantheons rather than monotheism. So, yeah, they're gods, still gods.
Didn't they have a sister?
Very possibly.
I'm sure there was a sister. And
According
she
to the
was
film, they did.
Very possibly.
All I'm saying is, according to the film, they did.
It rings a bell. Yeah, anyway, when you guys are finished, I'll tell you how his hammer was made.
Go on then, tell me how Thor's hammer was made. I'm going to try and get this right all night now.
Thor's fine.
Thor,
For him.
thank
Thor.
you, because you're ruining my fantasy, Andy, seriously. I want to go Thor.
Oh, do it for me, Thor!
Yeah, it doesn't quite have the same ring, does it, as Thor? Anyway, how was his hammer made?
I
Mark?
will tell you. The hammer called Mjolnir, yeah?
Yeah. That's good.
I don't care. Right, anyway.
Well, you
Nation of
stopped.
Thor-
I thought you were asking me. You stopped speaking. I assumed you were asking me.
I think that's how you pronounce it, isn't it? Mjolnir.
Just get on with it.
Well,
So
yeah,
how
yeah.
was his hammer made?
The next coffee maker. Right. One day, Loki the trickster found himself in an especially mischievous mood, so pretty much he's like me, and cut off the gorgeous golden hair of Sif, the wife of Thor. Ooh, I bet even. When Thor learned of this, his quick temper was enraged, and he seized Loki and threatened to break every single bone in his body. Loki pleaded with the Thunder God to let him go down to Svartalfheim, the cavernous home of the dwarves, and see if the master craftspeople could fashion a new head of hair for Sif. This one even more beautiful than the original. Thor allowed this.
Sorry, I'm going to interrupt you there. So he pops along to the dwarves, says, "My bird has just had her hair chopped off. I need a wig, basically." And they go, "No, we can't do a wig, but we do you a hammer."
No. Loki went down and said, "I'm going to get killed. Can you sort this out for me?"
Oh, all right, sorry. Carry on.
And Thor allowed this, and off went Loki. I said, Thor.
Thor.
Thor!
Shut up, the pair of you! This geezer allowed this, and off Loki went to Svartalfheim. There he was able to obtain what he desired. The sons of the dwarf Ivaldi forged not only a new head of hair for Sif, isn't that a cleaner, but also two other marvels, blimey, Skidbladnir, which is assembled from thin pieces of wood, and is the best of all ships, which is always has a favourable wind and can be folded up and put into one's pocket. And Gungnir, which means swaying in Old Nordic, which was a deadly civil spears. Having completed his task, Loki was overcome by an urge. He really needs to sort that out.
Loki used to get lots of urges.
He approached the brothers Brokia and Sindri, which basically mean metalwork and sparkspray, and taunted them, saying that he was sure the brothers could never forge 3 new creations equal to those that had just been made by the sons of Ivaldi. I said Ivaldi, not Vivaldi. In fact, he even bet his head on their lack of ability. Brokia and Sindri, however, accepted the wager. And as they worked, a fly, who of course was none other than Loki in disguise, stung Sindri's hand. When the dwarf pulled his creation out of the fire, it was a living boar with golden hair. This was a Gullinbursti, which means golden bristle. It gave off light in the dark and could run better than any horse, even break through water or air. Sindri then set another piece of gold on the fire, and Brokia worked the bellows. The fly bit Brokia in the neck, and Sindri drew out a magnificent ring, Draupnir, which means dripper, which I'm hastening to add. Why? From this ring, every ninth night, here we go, fall 8 new golden rings of equal weight. Sindri put... Yes?
Oh, it's Lord of the Rings all over.
I'm nearly done. Sindri then put... do you know what? I worry about this Lord of the Rings and metal and gold rings and this, that and the other. Bit dodgy. Sindri then put iron on the hearth and told Brokia that for his next working, they must be especially meticulous. For a mistake would be more costly than with the previous 2 projects. Loki immediately stung Brokia's eyelid, and the blood blocked the dwarf's eye, preventing him from properly seeing his work. Sindri produced a hammer of unsurpassed quality, which never missed its mark and would boomerang back to its owner after being thrown. But it had one flaw. The handle was short. Sindri lamented that this had almost ruined the piece, which was called Mjolnir, which means lightning. Nevertheless, sure of the great worth of their 3 treasures, Sindri and Brokkr made their way to Asgard to claim the wages that were due to them. Loki made it to the Hall of the Gods before the dwarves and presented the marvels he had acquired. To Thor, he gave Sif's new hair and the hammer Mjolnir. To Odin went the ring Draupnir and the spear Gungnir. And Freyr was the happy recipient of Skidbladnir and Gullinbursti. I'm glad I ain't got to say them again. As grateful as the gods were to receive these gifts, especially Mjolnir, which they foresaw would be a lot of help to them in their battles against the ice giants, they nevertheless concluded that Loki still owed the dwarves his head. When the dwarves approached Loki with knives, the cunning god pointed out that he had promised them his head, but not his neck. Brokkr and Sindri contented themselves with sewing Loki's mouth shut and returned to the fort. Yes!
Well done. You mentioned something quite important there, actually, the Lord of the Rings. Tolkien did indeed base his story, particularly on a story called the Nibelungenlied, which is the Germanic version of a lot of the mythology you just spoke of. Obviously, the Germanic mythology and Norse mythology are very linked with each other and have sort of pop up about the same time, and they did feed into each other. Obviously, they're very close together geographically. But there's never been a real British version of the story of this Ring of Power, which is the central theme of both Lord of the Rings and, of course, the Vio's Ring cycle and these mythologies. So that's why Tolkien wrote Lord of the Rings, was to create a British version of that same mythology. So that's why you do see similarities and resonances within when you compare Lord of the Rings and the Ring cycle, for example, and the Nibelungenlied, which is the sort of the Germanic version of the Norse myth you're talking about here. So yeah, that's an important point. There was a real deliberate connection between those stories. Wow, that was an interesting boom. What was that?
Well, that was an interesting boom. That was me sitting forward going, wow. Kaz, I know, it was. Kaz.
Yeah.
Oh,
You've been too quiet.
Yes, she's still there.
She is still there. She's, bless her, just sitting back and not getting a chance really to say much. How are you feeling at this point?
It's all really interesting, so...
It is. It's fascinating, isn't it? And then you can see, like, what we have in today's culture coming through from these ancient, old myths and legends that are still being drip-fed via, films and books and things like that, even now. I mean, we talked about J.R. Tolkien. I want to say J.K. Tolkien. I know that's like a mixture of two authors. J.R. Tolkien, those films... In particular, like you said, the links there with these stories are so prevalent. And now with it, and I know it's fluffing this right down to the Marvel, or is it? No, it's Marvel. It is Marvel. Yes.
This is Marvel. I've not had my daughter running, shaking her head at you, so yeah.
It is Marvel. I get Marvel and DC muddled up all the time. I know, I'm so sorry, everybody. I'm not, well versed in those films. But, though, we have these characters coming forward now, like Loki and Thor and Ragnarok was the end of Wendell Wars. But, those kind of things are being brought forward all the time, even in today's society. And these are all based on these mythologies that we're talking about.
This is very, very true. And as you rightly said about the films, they did get a lot of things wrong in the films, but obviously. I won't go into that.
Obviously.
But it's actually brought it all to life. I mean, yeah, thanks to Marvel and DC and all these characters that I used to read as a kid have now been brought to life. And I think they're absolutely brilliant. Loads of people do. And it does give us a little look into mythology from a long time ago, because a lot of us, myself included, are related to Vikings, from hundreds and hundreds of years ago, so it's quite cool.
So cool. But when you look at history, these have been reborn and revisited. I mean, you think going back to, I'm going to be so corrected on this, Wagner.
Yeah.
1600s?
No.
I knew I was going to get that wrong. What era was Wagner?
He was born 1813. 1813 and died in 1883.
Oh, okay. So that era,
Victorian era.
Victorian, yes, thank you. Reborn again through the Victorian era, through things like opera. Nowadays it's film and cinema, but every couple of 100 years, these stories are being retold, revisited in a different format, but still being fed to the masses from something that was, you're going back to like pre-Viking times, aren't we?
You certainly go back to Norse mythological times, anyway. Because if I remember rightly, there were a race before the Vikings, and I can't remember for the life of me who they were. But I think they came from Germanic tribes originally.
Well, they're all from that particular area. The Viking name is something that's been applied to the 9th and 10th century marauders and seafaring nations of Scandinavia. But Scandinavians is probably the correct term. It's always been the Scandinavian region.
And to be absolutely honest, I like the way it... Excuse me. You've got all these weapons of power and this, that and the other. And remember, we said that in all the holy books, you've got all these gods with this, that, and then you've got the Greek gods, you've got the Roman gods. They all had these various implements that could do various weird, wonderful things and flying machines and this, that, and the other. And there's no exception there with Thor. The hammer of lightning, and he could also fly with it. Everybody's got Dave.
Yeah, very much so. And I just find it fascinating that we revisit it and revisit it and revisit it, and it comes up in modern times as much as it does back then. And these are all characters we know. You ask kids nowadays, they know these people, they know these characters. They may not know the whole true story of it and where the mythology came from, but this is where it's born. These seeds of what's being drip-fed them now are things that one day, one kid might go, I want to look into Loki or Thor or Odin or any of these names they might have heard in a film. And that is where knowledge begins. The seeds of what's being drip-fed now through mass media is where these legends keep being reborn. And that's another thing I find absolutely fascinating.
That's why I love it. That's the same with the paranormal. That was originally one of the first things that got me into the paranormal was the books that were at school. Completely.
And then you get someone like Andy Mercer who really knows the subject, and that's why we got him on the show.
Right.
Because he was that little boy once upon a time who heard a story.
He's a library.
And became a library.
I said it a long time ago. I'm an obsessive. When I get into something, I really get into it. I like to learn more and more about it. So, and yes, I do spend a lot of time just reading and not doing much else.
Rather library of thieves, aren't you?
Yeah, well, if I could get to that one, I'd be brilliant, yes.
Well, there's one day I'm going to go and visit. I've been to Andy's house, but he's not let me loose it in his library yet because he has a library. And one day he is going to allow me in there, surely. Oh, clearly I'm not going to be allowed in his library. I might steal too much, that's the trouble. Come out of there looking like a 20-stone woman right when I go in there size 6. I'm stealing all these books.
Just look at what Andy put in the chat room about Saruman destroying the forest. Yeah, absolutely spot on. And a lot of the old myths and legends and blah, 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 and Wagner, all that sort of stuff is used in the Discworld books as well.
Yeah. I mean, it's certainly prevalent with, we were talking in the chat rooms, you can see about Tolkien, the whole thing about the First World War, the mechanization of war and the destruction of life wholesale. It kind of reflected in the idea of the orcs breeding things for war, basically. And I'm just saying specifically about the turn down the forest is industrialization. That was very much the themes that he was also making a thing of in the Lord of the Rings stories. And so the basis was the mythology that didn't exist, that should exist here. And then bringing these other elements into it, there's darker forces, the whole thing of this massive tower of Sauron, the great eye, the flames, it was all industrialization, the destruction of nature, and the idea of the Black Lands are all kind of decimated of life. They're all part of that kind of thing, his fear of the future, what it was going to be like. And to some extent, he's absolutely right. Other areas, thankfully, not quite so right. But yeah, he was reflecting those fears, certainly.
Well, look at Treebeard. He was speaking up for the destruction of all the trees and his friends, wasn't he?
Absolutely, yeah. That's all that idea. If the trees could speak, what would they say? How would they react? They get pretty violent, basically, which is what they do.
May I suggest for a show, young Missy Kelly there, I'd quite like to do one on giants at some point. Because we've missed loads and loads and loads of stuff about Norse and this, that, and the other. We've missed about them finding the binding of Fenrir, the marriage of Njord and Skardi, and also Thor cross-dressing to get his hammer back. MC Hammer, you can't touch this. And there was also Odin's discovery of the runes, which I haven't mentioned because you're going to be doing a show on the runes.
Yeah.
Yes.
That would be there.
I would like to do a show on giants, and that would include some of the giants from Norse mythology.
Okay, well, there's our subject for next week then, giants.
Thank you very much.
Okay.
But not the BFG, no.
Damn. I love the BFG. Anyway, we need to wrap this show up. Thank you, guys, so much for bringing so much information to the show. That's been absolutely brilliant. I've learned a lot tonight as well. Now, on Sunday evening, I have 2 real-life shamans in the studio, modern-day shamans who work in the old way. I've got Crystal Atlantis and Jackie Manton, and they've promised to bring their drums along and give us a little sample of drumming. That's on Sunday night at 9 p.m. Next week, we go into another full week of shows. Monday, the Parasearch UK Encore show. Trust me, we did that last night. It is... Even Andy was listening in and messaging me privately throughout the whole show. Bless him. And
you need me back in the American show.
And I know, Mark. And he was talking, he was under the pseudonym of Samael. So you need to listen into that one on Monday evening. On Tuesday evening, the Paranormal Concept Show with Mr. Paul Rook. On Wednesday, we have the double whammy with Sean Cadman going live at 8 p.m. and Haunted Histories at 9 p.m. Thursday evening, we've got our very own Caz Rooney in the studio.
Whoop, whoop, whoop.
With her Spectral Zone. She did a fantastic job. If you missed the Anand Celeste show, then you seriously need to go back and have a listen to that one because that was absolutely brilliant. Talking empaths and protection, which is a subject that's been absolutely underestimated recently. So go back, have a listen to that one. But don't forget, next Thursday she's back on. And then next Friday, the Dark Mirror show is all about giants, as we've just decided, live on air. Click, click.
I'm happy.
And on that note, guys, don't forget any of our shows you can go back, listen to on YouTube or on the Spreaker account if you've missed any throughout this week, because we've had some fascinating shows this week. And if you've missed any of them, then you're silly and you need to go back and listen to them. And on that note, say goodbye, everybody. Thank you so much. Say goodbye.
Goodbye, everybody.
Bye-bye.
And I bid you all a very farewell. Good night.
Thank you for listening. Don't forget to join us for more shows throughout the week. Find us on Facebook, Twitter, and the World Wide Web to keep up to date with all the shows right here on Parasearch Radio.